Many, if not all of you in the room will know that back in February 2016, 4 of my colleagues were tragically killed in a workplace accident at Didcot Power Station. And since then, I've been heading up the initial on-site incident response team, as well as leading the ongoing investigation into causation. I still remember my colleague, Mark Carlos, our contracts director, coming into my office, and all he said to me was, "Stop what you're doing, we've got to go." So I jumped in the car, and literally we were probably 5 minutes down the road before he actually said to me that the building had collapsed, that we had colleagues seriously injured, and that we had colleagues missing. As myself, Mark Coleman and Mark Carlos were driving down to Didcot, hurtling down the motorway, we hit the central reservation. Had that in itself being a little bit more serious than a buckled rear wheel, our whole incident management response could have been an awful lot different. So that's perhaps the first takeaway lesson from today in terms of planning how you're going to get key people down to site safely. A lot of people are asking, of course, now we're sort of approaching the 2-year anniversary, when are we going to find out what's gone on? As an organisation, Coleman's is committed to sharing lessons learned, but with an investigation into causation still very much ongoing, I'm afraid that I'm not going to be able to be drawn on causation today or speculate about causation in any way. Today I want to focus on our post-incident experience. Having seen firsthand the devastating impact that a fatal accident can have on the families of colleagues, the survivors and witnesses, and those first responders, I sincerely hope that as an industry we never experience the like again. But in the spirit of hoping for the best and planning for the worst, perhaps by sharing some of our post-incident experience, it will at least encourage many of you to go away and perhaps revisit your own incident management plans. Because it's very easy, in my experience, to underestimate just how resource intensive a major incident will be. It's very easy to underestimate just how long you're going to be dealing with a major incident for. And it's very easy to underestimate the long-term significant impact, particularly in terms of mental health issues such as post-traumatic stress disorder and burnout on your senior management team, that a fatal accident will have on your business. And just to put some context around that, 80% of our senior leadership team were embedded on site for the first 8 weeks post-incident. 50% of our senior leadership time was in some way, shape or form taken up by dealing with Didcot-related matters in the first 12 months following the accident. And even now, approaching 2 years on, we're still coming to terms with and helping and supporting colleagues who are suffering both with physical injuries and post-traumatic stress and burnout issues, which, as I say, I'll touch on later. Now, the textbook response to dealing with a major incident is to parachute your senior leadership team down onto site. And in doing so, you move that decision-making closer to where the action's happening. And you also allow those managers who are empowered to coordinate events on the ground. And that did work well for us. So in developing or perhaps revisiting your own incident management plans and making decisions about who is going to be in your team and what their roles and responsibilities are going to be, back to this issue of just how resource intensive something can be, what you don't actually realise fully, I don't think, is just the enormity of the amount of stakeholders that you're going to be dealing with. And it's those stakeholder relationships that I'm going to touch on throughout this presentation. Before I do, though, and it might sound a little daft, let's just touch on a couple of practical matters. When you arrive on site with a major incident, the chances are the emergency services are going to be using your site offices and welfare facilities for their command and control centre. So any incident management team that you're taking down, you're going to need to find premises, whether it's office space or hotel facilities, for them to work from. You're also going to be dealing with a lot of your colleagues who are going to be traumatised, stressed, feeling lost, And because there are no on-site welfare facilities, and particularly if you're working out of town and the lads are in digs, you're going to want to find a facility where they can be looked after and taken care of and you can communicate effectively with them, rather than leaving them in the digs on their own, which is not going to be good for them. And also you've got to think about, if 80% of your leadership team are down on site dealing with an incident, who's running your business? Because you're still going to have a number of clients and a number of projects that are ongoing and live. So it's critical that you identify people within your organisation who can deputise for you and who you can empower and trust to run the business in your absence. The most important stakeholder that you're going to be dealing with throughout this whole process, should you ever be in this terrible situation, is going to be the families of missing or injured colleagues, and it's absolutely critical that you put them at the top of your priority list and at the centre of everything that you're doing, including decision making. Put yourself in the position of the families. They're at home going about their business and they get a phone call from somebody that they've never spoken to before. Might actually be the case they hear something pop up on the news bulletin. Straight away they're going to be worried and concerned about their loved ones, and they're going to get a phone call that says perhaps your loved one has been injured and is in hospital, or even worse than that, they may be dead or missing. The natural instinct is to want to leave home and be close to loved ones in that situation, so you're going to have to straight away start taking care of their immediate welfare needs. So booking transport and accommodation for them. Before Didcot, I'd sort of got this perhaps naive view that the emergency services would take care of a lot of the family-related issues, almost sort of have a support package in place, wrapped around the families a bit like a comfort blanket. That couldn't be further from the truth. The reality is that it's going to be absolutely incumbent on you to help and support those families as best you can at what is going to be the most difficult time of their lives. And what you need to recognise is that in any plan that you're drawing up, you need to build in some flexibility into that plan, because they have got no control over many events that are going on at that particular time, but they have got control of how they interact with you. So you need to flex and meet their demands and requirements based upon terms that they determine, not just go in and say, this is what we're doing. What's absolutely critical is that the directors and owners of the business meet the families at a very early stage, and I would encourage you to show emotion and to say sorry. Don't make the same mistake of the likes of Thomas Cook. And if any of you know the Thomas Cook incident, there was a boiler explosion in an apartment in Greece. A young lad was killed, and for many months after that incident, the directors of Thomas Cook refused to accept any responsibility and didn't even say sorry. If you don't meet the families and you don't face up to their feelings, you will be criticised, and rightly so. Because what's most important is that you're available to the families, and it's about putting them at the centre and putting their needs and feelings ahead of your own. My personal experience is all they want is the truth. Of course, they're going to be angry, they're going to be hurt, they're going to be upset, worried sick in some instances. But you're going to have to be resilient enough to deal with that anger, that frustration and that hurt. Don't take what they say personally. Don't respond to it. You know, it's very easy to want to bite back. You have to take that because you have to accept that their wishes and feelings are at that point in time much more important than your own. Now, in reviewing your management plans, I'd encourage you to identify people in your business who've got good organisational skills, who can take care of booking transport and accommodation for the families, meeting their basic welfare needs like organising food, clothing, toiletries. You're also going to need to take care of their financial needs, and I'm mindful of the very first time that I met one of the partners of one of the lads who was missing and subsequently found dead. She was absolutely distraught about the fact that her partner, you know, her teenage sweetheart, her lifelong love, you know, was no longer with her at that point in time. And the second thing that she was worried about was the fact that Chris had just been paid, and they didn't have a joint account, and the fact that he took care of all of the bills, and the rent was due tomorrow, and the electricity bill was due at the end of the week. So you're going to need to empower people in your organisation and put money aside just to take all of those worries off the table because they've got enough on the plate. You're also going to need to embed people with the families, and that doesn't mean to say you're going to have to have your own people trained as counsellors, but you're going to want people in and around the families just to support them and to attend to their needs. As I said, be available based upon terms that they determine. And those people are going to have a high degree of empathy and resilience because they're going to try and build relationships in the most difficult of circumstances. And in the spirit of looking to put the families first and at the centre, talk to the families about what they want. One of the things that came across when we spoke to them was that they didn't want updates about what was happening on site from when they switched on the television, switched on the radio, or overhearing other people talking at breakfast in the hotel where they were stopping. They absolutely wanted news and updates from key decision makers. So we had a sort of families first policy, which meant that we had to commit to every time we were making a major decision on site with the other stakeholders, that before any decisions were made or any press bulletins were released, we would be meeting with the families first and sometimes giving some really difficult news. But once you've committed to that, you have to be entirely consistent. Now, at the time of the accident, we had about 30 people on site who I would categorise as witnesses and survivors. In the aftermath of that, that terrible incident, we had people who were in shock, milling around, not really knowing what to do with themselves. That feeling of hopelessness, that frustration, anxiety, was a rescue and recovery operation about to kick off a few hours after. And the longer it goes on, that frustration and that anxiety turns to anger. And what you tend to find is that unless you show strong leadership and effective communication, people can become quite partisan. We had on site at Didcot some well-embedded Coleman employees, died in the war 15 years in, as well as bringing in some people from other companies who got the knowledge and experience that we were lacking. This was our first power station. So you're going to have to communicate effectively with these people, and you're going to have to deal with things like people are going to want to go home, which is a totally normal response. They want to be with their families. But they're going to be prevented from going home by people like the police, the HSE, your own legal teams, who are going to want to take witness statements from them, particularly in relation to maybe where missing colleagues were last seen. So in preventing them from going home, unless you're showing them leadership and effectively communicating with them, you're increasing their level of anxiety. You're also going to have people who are going to want to go home, but you're going to have to make a very tough decision. Difficult circumstances, there are no easy decisions, but they may have integral knowledge to the site. They may have specialist technical experience, demolition engineers, structural engineers, safety managers, the site managers, that the emergency services are going to want to retain because of their specialist knowledge and experience. So, again, you're going to have to communicate effectively with them as to the reasons why they are being prevented from going home and seeing their loved ones. And then you're going to get those people who want to stay even though you've risk assessed them and you know it's in their best interest to go home. Yeah? And that's not always an easy sell either. If I can just touch now, very briefly, on the mental health impacts of a fatal accident. Mental health's a big thing at the moment, hot topic. I think figures in the UK industry say that 1 in 4 people are suffering from some form of mental health issue, and maybe 1 in 6 is suffering from having even suicidal thoughts. So it's a massively hot topic. And of course, anybody that's exposed to a major traumatic event such as Didcot, where they've seen their colleagues killed or they may be missing, of course, are at severely heightened risk of post-traumatic stress disorder. It's really important that you understand and look out for the signs and symptoms of post-traumatic stress, and then understand what sits behind those changes in displayed behaviours. So what you're going to see is perhaps mild people suddenly become more short-tempered and angry, Similarly, those really outgoing characters that you get on site might suddenly become quite withdrawn. That won't happen in the first few days because people are in shock, but it will start to happen 6, 8 weeks down the line, 6 months later, when a colleague comes up to you, throws their arms around you, and you have a bloody good cry together. In terms of what we did and what worked well for us, we were seeking medically led solutions to solving some of these problems. So on day 2, we had a comprehensive team of counsellors on site, and they were sort of doing a traffic light assessment of people's emotional state, red, amber, green. Now, not everybody wants to participate with counselling on day 1, yeah? So some people would go and they'd get a green, they say, I'm fine. And they were, interestingly, the people who were 6 months down the line crying in your arms. Those people who were assessed as being red or amber, and once they'd given their witness statements, they were allowed to go home. But importantly, when you send people home, you've got to stay connected. Because if you don't stay connected, what's going to happen is that you're going to lose that person. And what I mean by that is they're not going to be able to be reintegrated back into your business. So it's really important that on a daily basis, and this is where it becomes resource hungry, you're going to need a team of people phoning them on a daily basis with updates about what's happening on site, who's recovering well, who's not doing so well, what's happening, as well as making sure that they're taking part in the counselling provisions that you've laid on for them. So if they were in a red category, for instance, and they bonded with the counsellor on site, there would be a daily phone call with that counsellor. They may have been put in touch with face-to-face local counselling services, or even just have access to a 24-hour helpline that they could talk to. When you move past that sort of initial phase from planning a recovery or a rescue operation and actually move into the phase of machines are rolling, what you'll find is that the police, the HSE, and it's good practice, is that people want you to risk assess the exposure of finding colleagues that may be dead or severely injured. And part of that risk assessment will throw out the fact that you need to start split shifting your teams to reduce their exposure to risk, to allow them to have breaks to recover, and also allow them to access on-site counselling facilities. And I know we were only involved partly in the rescue and recovery operation. If there's anybody in here from Brown and Mason who I know were absolutely critical to the finding of our deceased colleagues in phase 2 of the recovery operation, I'm sure you guys had to go through it. And what I would say is thank you very much for doing that. You know, indebted to you. I want to talk about burnout very quickly, because that's something that creeps up on you. Your senior leadership team are very likely to be exposed to burnout. Burnout is caused by long periods of exposure to very stressful situations. So we've got a senior leadership team that are working 20 hours a day on site for the first 8 weeks, and then a retained team that's still dealing with the families and all the other stakeholders for a period of 4 months after that, and the legacy is ongoing. So what you'll start to find is that managers involved will start to come a little late, start to leave a little bit early, maybe a little bit more withdrawn, not showing that same leadership drive. Those are key indicators of burnout caused by lack of sleep, fatigue, loss of confidence. So again, when you start to see those things, you need to be able to have policies and procedures in place to direct them towards counselling services. Planning for a recovery operation, certainly in those first few hours post-incident, is time critical. So when you land on site, it's absolutely fundamental that you know the sort of command and control structure that you're plugging into. Excuse me. The emergency services will typically include the fire brigade, paramedics, the police, the HSE. They're the first responders, and they do operate in this sort of hierarchical command and control structure. As a contractor, you can expect to plug into Gold and Silver Command, and if I just explain what they are, Gold Command, these are the strategic guys. They operate off-site. They're ultimately moving the pieces on the board, making the big decisions, interpreting and evaluating the information that's being fed back to them from the ground, and ultimately what they're doing is evaluating the risk against the reward of putting more lives at risk to potentially save an individual or others. So they're making tough decisions, and you're going to be plugged into that process. They're also going to be dealing with the media, the family liaison, and managing that whole stakeholder management process. Silver Command are the guys on site, suited and booted, in your welfare facilities, looking through your drawings, talking to your demolition engineers. They're the people that are going to be out with the sniffer dogs, looking at ways of moving rubble to recover colleagues. And they're going to want access, as I say, to key people that might want to go home, which could include specialist plant operators. It's important that I just touch on the dual role of the police and the HSE. One arm of the police and the regulator is very much focused on the preservation of life, so they're plugged into that gold, silver, bronze command structure. They're involved in planning, structural assessments, risk assessments. But you've got another aspect, which is the police and the HSE will also want to, and they're obliged to, commence their investigation immediately. And that can throw you off guard, because at a time where you're focusing all of your attention on wanting to recover your colleagues, all of a sudden you've got another layer of pressure that's coming onto you when investigators come into your offices and say, we'd like to seize all of your electronic records, we want copies of all your site files. Those site files you're going to want to keep on site because they might be critical to planning for a rescue and recovery operation. So back to this, just how resource hungry it can be, you're going to need a team of people, depending on how big your site is, photocopying, scanning documents and managing that evidence gathering process on your behalf. Let's touch on the media. Effectively managing the media is absolutely critical to successfully managing a major incident. There's a general there is a general and genuine public interest in significant major incidents. I watch the news the same as everybody else. The HSE, the emergency services, they all know how critical the media is, and that's why they've got masses of off-site support in press offices focused purely on managing external messaging. It's critical that you're plugged into those press offices, and it's critical that you're plugged into the press offices of other major stakeholders, because local and national TV and radio are going to be constantly on the phone wanting updates for breakfast, lunchtime, evening and 10 o'clock news. They're also going to be wanting to break stories as things develop on site, now on social media. And in addition to that, you've got social media, which I'll touch on a little bit later. But all I would say is if you underestimate the media and the impact that the media can have on the well-being of your employees, the families and your brand, you're going to be in a whole world of pain. If you don't fill that void by being plugged into those structures, somebody else will. So in the context of sharing some lessons learned, I just want to talk a little bit about social media. It can be very negative, particularly in the context of the families. Don't be surprised if ex-employees suddenly come out of the woodwork, guys that have worked on site and suddenly become the champions of the families. And actually the families don't want that. What they actually want is their own voice. They don't want people muddying the waters. All they actually want is cold, hard facts. Don't be surprised if ex-employees that may have been dismissed for fighting, drug taking, not following your safe systems of work, suddenly come out of the woodwork and want to sort of settle some old scores. And don't be surprised if some of those employees that are suffering with their own survivor's guilt, maybe stuck at home in the digs of an evening, have suddenly started drinking a little bit too much because of the lack of sleep and the nightmares and the problems that they're dealing with, want to express their feelings of survivor's guilt and anger and frustration on social media. So you can't control everything. Try and control those things that you can by locking down your website and locking down your social media pages, particularly Facebook, which can be, really nasty at times. Yeah? Because once something's out there, it's very, very difficult to remove it. Clients have a huge role to play post-incident, and your plan needs to reflect just how your client is geared up. We were very fortunate at Didcot that we had a multinational client who was excellent and who was very well resourced, was able to bring in resources globally, primarily from all over Europe, And they had a very clear plan, which was to stay on site until conditions were normalised. For us, that meant that we could work collaboratively and share the load on dealing with some of the stakeholder management. And certainly in those initial hours post-incident, we relied very heavily on their media experience and their press officers in terms of getting messages out to the families and communicating message to the media. But what's important to remember is whilst there's a time to work together, as we were told very early on, there's also a time when you'll drift apart. So they're going to want to start their own internal investigation at a time that the police are investigating and the HSE. You've got your own internal investigation going, you're dealing with the families, you're dealing with the media, and you're trying to plan a recovery operation as well as run a business. Of course, they're your clients and you're going to want to keep them happy because you want to work with them again. Yeah? And they're ultimately your paymaster. But conflict will creep in because they're going to be requesting documents from you, and therefore you're going to need more resources to start photocopying information for them. But at the time that they're asking this and pressing you for information, you're also going to have a legal team that's sitting on your shoulder saying they're not entitled to that, and actually you could be prejudicing your own position at a future point in time if you share that with them. So that can cause some conflict. So you've got to manage that effectively. And finally, don't think that commercial considerations go away. So again, you're dealing with this pressure cooker situation, the stakeholders that I've talked about, and 2 or 3 days after the incident, you'll probably get some notices drop on your desk to say you're on stop and you're in delay, and any costs associated with the incident are going to be at your cost, yeah, so on and so forth. So again, you're going to need a new commercial work stream dealing with that. And the situation we found ourselves in, having fought long and hard to be involved in the full recovery of the job, or of our colleagues, and completion of the job, was that because the police and HSE were dealing with what they considered to be evidence, it wouldn't be normal for a contractor to be handling evidence when they were the subject of an investigation. So therefore, we agreed that it would be in the best interest of everybody if we didn't complete the job. So then you're in another whole world of pain commercially because you're looking to unpick yourself from a contract at a time when you've got all of these other things going on. There is help out there. You know, dealing with major incidents is difficult. But your help comes primarily from your insurers because they will parachute legal teams in to support you. They will put expert engineers in to help you start to understand causation. They will provide counselling services for your staff and families, and they may even have some specialist sort of critical incident PR companies that will help you manage internal and external messaging. So in terms of lessons learned, you know, and the takeaway from the days is one of the things that you need to do when you're revisiting your plan is just go back to your insurance brokers, look at your policies and see what provisions are available to you and that you know how to access them. Just to conclude, and I know I'm running a little bit late, but you can't think of everything, but hopefully an awareness of what we've been through gives you an understanding of what you need to plan and be prepared for. And I've really just scratched the surface, as you can appreciate. But once you've got a plan, work your plan and keep it under review. It's absolutely critical, as I've said, that you put the families and your colleagues at the centre of everything that you do, and that you have the right people around you with a clear understanding of what they're trying to achieve. And I think the RWE model was very good. You know, it was about having a team in place that was going to stay with this project, you know, and that's what it is. It's a project. You've got to start, a middle and an end, you know, with an end goal, which is you only let that team walk away once you've normalised your trading activities. Having said all of that about how important it is to plan and prepare, I'm going to share with you now, and sorry if I get a bit upset, but I can't help it. Nothing can prepare you for getting a phone call at 4 o'clock on a Tuesday afternoon telling you that a building's collapsed, that one of your colleagues has died instantly, and that there are other colleagues that are missing. I don't think anything could have prepared my colleagues that were making those difficult phone calls to the families in the most difficult of circumstances. And when I say that, we'd closed the gates to our office and we actually had the media climbing over the railings, banging on the windows, shouting through the glass when my colleagues were trying to make sensitive calls to the families. I don't think anything can prepare you for that first time that you walk onto site and you're hit by almost a wall of noise that hits you in the chest and the bright lights, and standing in your welfare unit with your colleagues around you, still covered in dirt and dust, tears in their eyes when you're doing a roll call. Nothing can prepare you for meeting the families for the first time, dealing with their emotions as well as your own emotions. And some of those conversations are a bit blurred, but I remember the Collins family, Mick, who was killed instantly, his wife, his brother-in-law, his mum, and the extended family came down. We met them about 2 o'clock in the morning at a local hotel. They were a lovely family, so much dignity, and they put their arms around us and we cried together. And then Mick's mum just said, "Could you tell us how Mick died?" That's not easy. Nothing can prepare you for that. Thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, James, I can't even speak. You've been so brave to come up here today.
Thank you, Howard.
I'd just like, could we just break for coffee? We'll take some questions afterwards.
Okay.